Garrett, Capital One just accelerated our construction loan. We have 7 days to pay $40 million or they foreclose. Stop this madness. I smiled into the receiver. It's not madness, Julian. It's just a simple boundary correction. Call my lawyer. I hung up before he could shout. But to understand how we got to that phone call, we have to go back 8 months, to when the concrete for Stonebridge Innovation Plaza was still wet, and my former boss's son decided that 20 years of loyalty was worth exactly 0. I've been a licensed land surveyor in Loudoun County, Virginia, for over 2 decades. If you don't know this area, let's just say it's the data center capital of the world. A lot of people think surveying is just standing on the side of a road, looking through a telescope on a tripod. But the real work happens in the basement archives of the county recorder's office. Tracing yellowed parchment deeds from the 19th century, matching physical iron pipes in the dirt with meets and bounds descriptions written in legal Latin. I'm old school. I still carry a physical field book, writing down raw angles and chain distances with a pencil. The younger guys at Prescott Realty Group LLC laughed at me. They relied on digital GIS maps, drone photogrammetry, and GPS receivers that connect to virtual reference networks. They thought because a line looked neat on a computer screen, it was gospel. You're living in the Stone Age, Garrett, Connor Prescott told me. During our first meeting, Connor was 29, wore custom-tailored Navy suits with no socks, and had just inherited the Vice President of Acquisitions title from his father, Julian. Julian Prescott was a self-made developer who started with a single backhoe in the 80s. He used to be a reasonable man, but success and county board connections had bloated his ego. Harrison Kincaid, my maternal grandfather and a legendary local surveyor, had actually helped Julian acquire his first commercial parcels. When I joined the company 8 years ago, my grandfather made sure my employment contract had a very specific clause. It was Clause 14C. It stated that for any major commercial development I surveyed and prepared for zoning approval, I would receive a 2% non-dilutable equity stake in the holding LLCs upon the issuance of the permanent certificate of occupancy. For Stonebridge Innovation Plaza, a $50 million, 3-building office park designed for high-security defense contractors. That 2% was worth a cool $1 million, and the project was on track to get its certificate of occupancy by July 1st. Connor, however, had other plans. He wanted to flip the entire development to a real estate investment trust out of New York the moment the ink on the occupancy permit was dry. A $1 million payout to a guy who wore muddy work boots and spent his days in briar patches was not on his spreadsheet. To pull this off, Connor had to bypass the standard 3-week backlog for a certified physical ALTA NSPS land title survey, which would have cost $15,000. Instead, he signed a title insurance policy with a standard survey exception. This exception explicitly excluded coverage for any boundary issues or encroachments that a physical survey would have revealed. Connor assumed the county's digital GIS tax maps were accurate enough, and he signed off on the exclusion to save time and money. At the same time, Connor was counting on an old agreement. In 1994, my grandfather, Harrison Kincaid, had signed a contract with Julian Prescott regarding a 10-foot-wide strip of land along the western boundary known as the Kincaid Corridor. Connor's legal team assumed this was a permanent easement, but it wasn't. It was a conditional, permissive license. It explicitly stated that the license was personal, non-transferable, and would automatically terminate 60 days after Harrison's death, or immediately if Prescott Realty Group committed a material breach of their joint venture agreements, one of which was my employment contract. A week before my firing, Connor brought in a young surveyor named Tyler, a fresh graduate who had worked under Connor's fraternity brother. Tyler was hired to audit my boundary surveys for Stonebridge. He looked at my hand-drawn maps of the property line along the western boundary and scoffed. "Your boundary is off by 10 feet along the old farm road." "Garrett," Tyler said, pointing to his iPad screen. "The county GIS database clearly shows the public right-of-way extends all the way to the tree line. Your map leaves a gap. The county GIS is a digitized approximation, kid," I said. "It has a margin of error of up to 15 feet on historical parcels. If you actually walked the line instead of sitting in the AC, you'd find the stone monument from the 1920 Kincaid partition deed. The public right-of-way stops 10 feet short of our property line. That strip is private land. The title company approved the assembly," Tyler sneered. "We consolidated the parcels last year. It's clean." "The title company did a desktop search," I replied. They didn't check the gaps and gores. And they certainly didn't tell you about the survey exception Connor signed. Tyler complained to Connor that I was being stubborn and delaying the final boundary certification. Connor used this as his weapon. He started sending me daily emails, demanding I sign off on the consolidated plat using Tyler's digital boundaries. I refused. As a licensed professional surveyor, my stamp carries personal legal liability. If I certify a false boundary, I can lose my license, face civil lawsuits, or even criminal charges for fraud. I told them I would only sign the plat if we secured a formal easement or bought the strip. Connor saw my refusal as the perfect opportunity. He called me into the main conference room on a Friday afternoon. Julian was sitting at the end of the long mahogany table, looking out the window at the steel frames of the office park rising in the distance. Connor tossed a folder onto the table. "You're holding up a $50 million project, Garrett," Connor said. "We have Aegis Tactical Systems scheduled to install their secure servers in 3 weeks. We can't get our final county inspection because you won't stamp the plat. This is insubordination. It's costing us thousands in daily interest on our construction loan." "I'm protecting the company," I said, looking at Julian. "If we build the main utility corridor and the entry road on land we don't own, the real owner can shut us down." Julian sighed, not looking at me. "Garrett, we've been running surveys here for 40 years. We know where the lines are. You're overthinking it. Just sign the plat." "I can't do that, Julian. Not without a proper title correction." Connor smiled. It was the smirk of a man who had just trapped his prey. "In that case, Garrett, we are terminating your employment with Prescott Realty Group, effective immediately. For cause. Your refusal to perform your core job duty has threatened the financial stability of this project. Under Clause 14C, since you are being terminated for cause before the issuance of the certificate of occupancy, your equity stake is voided." He slid a severance agreement across the table. It offered 2 weeks of pay in exchange for waiving all future claims. I looked at the paper, then at Julian, who still refused to look me in the eye. I didn't sign it. I stood up, took my car keys, and walked out. They thought they had saved $1 million. But they didn't know that by terminating me, they had just triggered the immediate cancellation of the 1994 permissive license. And since Connor had signed the survey exception, their title insurance wouldn't cover a single dime of the fallout. I walked back to my office under the hum of the fluorescent lights, feeling a strange sense of calm. The air in the building felt heavy, but for the first time in months, my shoulders were light. In my cubicle, Tyler was already standing near the doorway, holding a cardboard box. He had a look on his face that was trying to be sympathetic, but ended up looking like a vulture waiting for a carcass. "Connor asked me to make sure you only take personal items," Tyler said, keeping his eyes on my desk. "Company property, including the survey equipment and field computers, stays here. The Leica total station belongs to the firm," I said, my voice level. "But these are mine." I reached into the bottom drawer and pulled out my father's old brass plumb bob, a set of handwritten field notebooks from the early 90s, and my personal pocket transit. I placed them gently into my leather field bag. I didn't touch the company laptop. I didn't need to. All the data I needed was already registered in the Loudoun County Courthouse archives, stamped by the State Board of Surveyors years before Tyler was even born. I walked out of the building without saying a word to Connor, who was watching from the glass window of his elevated office. He was probably already drafting the email to the New York investors, letting them know the roadblock had been cleared. I spent the next 3 days in the basement of the Loudoun County Government Center in Leesburg. If you've never dug through historical land records, it's a world of dust, microfilm, and heavy leather-bound ledger books. The digital databases only go back so far. For the real history, you have to request the original patent books. I sat at a wooden table under a dim lamp, turning the pages of Deed Book 42, page 117, from November 12, 1920. There it was. A partition deed between the Kincaid family and the old Loudoun Agricultural Co-op. When the co-op sold their acreage to the group that eventually sold it to Prescott Realty, they drew the boundary line along the edge of an old drainage ditch. But the Kincaid family retained fee simple title to a 10-foot wide strip along the northern edge of that ditch to allow cattle access to the creek. It was a classic gore. A strip of land left over due to formatting errors in subsequent deeds. Over the decades, as the surrounding land was sold, subdivided, and paved, every single title insurance company simply copied the legal description from the previous deed without doing a physical survey of the ditch. The digital tax maps showed the road as county property because the county had paved a portion of it in the 70s. But paving a road doesn't transfer ownership. Only a deed or an eminent domain proceeding can do that, and the county had done neither. My grandfather, Harrison Kincaid, had discovered this gap in 1994 when Julian Prescott first started assembling the parcels for what would become the office park. Instead of fighting Julian, Harrison signed a temporary construction and access license. It allowed Prescott Realty Group to use the strip for construction staging, utility access, and road grading. But Harrison was a smart surveyor. He put a termination clause in that license. It stated that the permission was personal, non-transferable, and would automatically terminate 60 days after Harrison's death, or immediately if Prescott Realty Group committed a material breach of their joint venture agreements. One of which was my employment contract. My grandfather died 3 years ago. I was the sole executor of his estate, but I had never bothered to transfer the deed of that strip into my name. It was just a useless piece of dirt until now. I hired Fiona Mercer, a no-nonsense real estate litigator whose office was a block away from the courthouse. Fiona had a reputation for shredding arrogant developers in zoning hearings. She sat across from me, reviewing my grandfather's original contracts and my freshly stamped executorship papers. Julian and Connor Prescott are running a massive risk here, Fiona said, tapping her pen against the deed copy. They have already begun grading the road and laying the main conduits. They've laid 8-inch water mains and high-voltage electrical conduits right through the center of this 10-foot strip. That is a physical encroachment on private property. They think it's public right-of-way, I said. Tyler certified the plat based on the county's digital map. Then Tyler committed professional malpractice, Fiona replied with a cold smile. But more importantly, because they terminated you without cause. And yes, refusing to sign a false plat is not cause under Virginia law. They breached the covenant of good faith in your contract. That breach automatically triggers the termination of the temporary license under Section 9 of the 1994 agreement. Can they claim a prescriptive easement? I asked. They've been using that strip for 30 years, Fiona shook her head. No. Under Virginia law, a prescriptive easement requires hostile, adverse use. The 1994 agreement was a permissive license. Permissive use can never ripen into a prescriptive easement, no matter how long it lasts. The moment you revoke that permission, their continued use becomes active trespass. So the license is dead, I said. It's completely dead, Fiona confirmed. As of today, they are committing civil trespass. And because this is a defense contractor facility, the utility lines they are laying require strict security easements that they cannot legally obtain without your signature. What do you want to do, Garrett? I want to register the title transfer, I said. And then I want to give them a lesson in boundary law. That afternoon, Fiona filed the quitclaim deed, transferring the 10-foot strip from the Harrison Kincaid estate to Garrett Hayes. The filing fee was $45. I walked out of the clerk's office with a certified recorded deed bearing the county seal. I drove down to the Stonebridge construction site. The crew was busy. Yellow dump trucks were hauling gravel, and a steamroller was flattening the subbase of the new access road. This road was the only entry point from the main highway into the plaza. Without it, the buildings were landlocked. I stood on the shoulder of the highway, just outside the property line, and watched. I took out my camera and took high-resolution photos of the construction equipment crossing my land. I noted the GPS coordinates of the new utility poles and the trench where the fiber optic cables for Aegis tactical systems were being laid. They were building their entire $50 million future on my dirt, and they had no idea that the foundation was already gone. The timing had to be precise. In commercial real estate, there is a window of maximum vulnerability. For Prescott Realty Group, that window opened 2 weeks before the July 1st deadline. Aegis Tactical Systems had already signed a lease for 2 of the 3 buildings. Because they handled sensitive military logistics software, their contract with Prescott had a strict security and access clause. If the secure fiber trunk lines weren't fully operational and certified by June 25th, Aegis had the right to terminate the lease immediately and collect damages. Furthermore, the construction lender Capital One Bank had structured the $40 million development loan so that it would convert to a high-interest default rate if the permanent certificate of occupancy wasn't issued by July 1st. On June 15th, I met Fiona Mercer at her office. We had decided against filing a standard civil injunction if we ask a judge for a temporary restraining order to block the road ourselves, Fiona explained. The court will demand you post a massive bond to cover Prescott's potential delay damages. We're talking millions, but we don't need to do that. We let the state do the work for us. Instead of going to a judge, Fiona and I walked into the Loudoun County Building Inspections Department and the regional office of the Virginia Department of Transportation, or VDOT. We laid out our files, the certified 1920 Kincaid partition deed, the recorded transfer of ownership to my name, and the documented physical encroachment of the road and utility lines on the Kincaid Corridor. Prescott Realty Group has graded this driveway and laid utilities within the Route 7 highway buffer zone without a valid easement or a VDOT land use permit, Fiona told the regional engineer. They certified their plans using a faulty digital GIS map, bypassing the mandatory physical survey requirement. The VDOT engineer looked at the maps, then at the recorded deed. His face went pale. In Virginia, VDOT is notoriously strict about highway access management. If a developer builds a commercial entrance on private land without a recorded easement, it is a severe administrative violation. They don't have a right-of-way, the engineer said. This entrance is legally unauthorized. It's a safety hazard. At 6 a.m. the next morning, 2 orange VDOT trucks and a Loudoun County code enforcement SUV pulled up to the entrance of Stonebridge Innovation Plaza. I stood nearby on the public sidewalk, watching. The VDOT crew didn't hesitate. They set up flashing arrow boards, orange traffic cones, and heavy plastic barricades right across this asphalt entrance road. A county code enforcement officer walked up to the main gate and stapled a bright orange sheet of paper to the plywood fence. It was a formal stop work order and a notice of violation. The text was bold. All operations on this access roadway and utility corridor must see immediately. Unsanctioned encroachment on private property. Within minutes, a convoy of concrete mixer trucks and delivery vans for Aegis Tactical Systems was backed up onto the shoulder of Route 7, their hazard lights blinking. They couldn't turn in. The state highway entrance was legally closed. 10 minutes later, a black Lincoln Navigator screeched to a halt on the gravel shoulder. Connor Prescott climbed out, his face flush red, followed by Tyler, who looked like he had just seen a ghost. Connor marched up to the county code enforcement officer, waving his hands. "What is the meaning of this?" Connor shouted. "We have a final inspection scheduled next week. You can't shut down a $50 million project." "Who authorized this?" The code enforcement officer, a calm man named Henderson, pointed to the orange notice. "Your main entrance road and utility trenches are encroaching on a private parcel, Mr. Prescott," Henderson said. "VDOT has revoked your temporary construction access because you do not hold a valid easement or right-of-way for the Kincaid Corridor. Until this title dispute is resolved, no construction vehicles are permitted to cross this boundary." Connor turned, his eyes scanning the road until they landed on me. He marched over, his teeth clenched. "Garrett," Connor spat. "You did this. You called the county. You're trying to extort us because we fired you." "I didn't extort anyone, Connor," I said, keeping my hands in my pockets. "I just protected my property. I told you 8 months ago that Tyler's digital boundaries were wrong. You didn't want to listen because you wanted to save $15,000 on a physical survey." "We have a title insurance policy," Connor yelled. "They will clear this up in a second." "They won't," I replied. "Your title company just reviewed the survey exception you signed. You waived coverage for any boundary defects that a physical survey would have shown." "You're on your own." Connor turned to Tyler, grabbing him by the shoulder. "Is this true? Did you check the survey exception?" Tyler looked down, his voice barely audible. We needed to bypass the 3-week survey backlog to meet the loan closing deadline." Connor signed the waiver. "You idiot!" Connor screamed at him. Just then, a Loudoun County Sheriff's deputy cruiser pulled up. Connor ran to the officer, trying to get him to intervene. But the deputy, after speaking with the VDOT engineer and reviewing the stop work order, shook his head. "This is an administrative shutdown by the state, Mr. Prescott," the deputy said. "If your crew touches these barricades or attempts to drive equipment onto that strip, I will have to arrest them for violating a state highway order and civil trespass. Clear the area." The deputy walked back to his cruiser. The construction workers shut down their engines. The July 1st deadline was exactly 15 days away, and the gate to Stonebridge Innovation Plaza was locked by the state of Virginia. By the 5th day of the lockout, Prescott Realty Group was in a state of complete panic. Connor Prescott wasn't going down without a fight. Instead of negotiating, he tried to use his father's local political connections. He drafted an emergency petition to the Loudoun County Board of Supervisors, requesting they initiate an expedited eminent domain proceeding to condemn the Kincaid Corridor, claiming the strip was necessary for public utility access and economic development. Fiona Mercer and I had anticipated this move. In Virginia, while the government has broad condemnation powers, the process takes months, and it cannot be used solely to bail out a private developer from a bad business decision. But we didn't wait for the county board to debate. We went straight to the anchor tenant. Fiona contacted the Director of Security and Compliance at Aegis Tactical Systems. She laid out the facts. The secure fiber optic lines and communication trunks designed to transmit sensitive defense data were currently sitting on private land without an easement, and the entire utility corridor was under a county stop work order. Under federal defense contracting rules, specifically the Department of Defense's physical security standards for secure facilities, a contractor cannot operate out of a building where the critical communication infrastructure is subject to an active property dispute or lacks clean, uncontested legal easements. Furthermore, the public litigation over the land title was forcing the exact physical coordinates of their secure fiber lines into public court records. The reaction from Aegis was swift and brutal. Their general counsel sent a registered letter to Julian Prescott. It stated that, because the secure communication lines could not be certified by June 25th due to the access dispute and compliance violations, Prescott Realty Group was in material breach of the lease agreement. If the access issue wasn't legally resolved within 48 hours, Aegis would terminate the lease, reclaim their security deposit, and sue for $5 million in damages to cover the cost of relocating their operations center to a backup facility in Maryland. This letter triggered a chain reaction. Capital One Bank, hearing that their anchor tenant was about to walk, officially accelerated the $40 million construction loan. They gave Prescott Realty Group 7 business days to pay the full balance of the loan, or the bank would begin foreclosure proceedings on Stonebridge Innovation Plaza. That was when Julian Prescott finally broke. My phone rang at 7:30 a.m. on a Tuesday. I was sitting on my porch, enjoying the morning air when I saw the name on the screen, Garrett. Julian's voice was hoarse, stripped of his usual boardroom authority. The county just erected a flashing stop work sign at our main entrance. There are VDOT road crew trucks blocking the driveway. Did you call the state on us? I took a slow sip of my black coffee and leaned back in my chair. I didn't call them, Julian. I just showed them my deed. VDOT is just enforcing the law. Garrett, please, Julian stammered, his tone shifting from anger to desperation. We can talk about this. I had no idea Connor was going to terminate you like that. He told me you were refusing to do your job. He said the survey was flawed. I trusted him. Connor wanted to save $1 million on my equity stake, Julian, I said calmly. He thought he could use Tyler to fake the boundary lines and freeze me out. You stood there and watched him hand me the papers. You didn't say a word. It was a mistake, Julian said, his breathing heavy. A terrible mistake. Capital One is threatening to foreclose on the entire project. Aegis is going to pull out. If they do, Prescott Realty is done. The bank will take everything, including our family home. We need to settle this. I'll pay you your severance. I'll double it. This isn't about severance anymore, Julian, I said. This is about the Kincaid Corridor. You built your road and laid your utility lines on my land without permission. That's a physical encroachment. You have 2 choices. You can either tear up the asphalt, relocate your 8-inch water mains and fiber optic conduits off my land, which will take you 6 months and cost you millions, or you can talk to my lawyer. Garrett, please, let's meet. Just you and me. Like the old days with your grandfather. The old days died when you let your son run the business into a wall, Julian. Call Fiona Mercer. Her office is open at 9. I hung up the phone. I called Fiona and briefed her on the conversation. She laughed. They're circling the drain, Garrett. The title insurance company they used just sent them a reservation of rights letter. They are refusing to cover the litigation because Connor signed the survey exception. They are completely on their own. Let's make sure the settlement terms are ready, I said. They've been ready since yesterday, Fiona replied, and they're going to hurt. At 10 a.m., Julian and Connor Prescott, accompanied by their lead corporate counsel, walked into Fiona's conference room. Connor's tailored suit looked wrinkled. His hair was messy and he was no longer smiling. Julian looked 10 years older, his hands shaking slightly as he sat down across from us. The stage was set for the final reckoning. The atmosphere in Fiona Mercer's conference room was thick with silence. Julian Prescott sat with his head in his hands, while his corporate attorney, a senior partner named Sterling Vance, arranged his files. Connor Prescott sat next to his father, staring at the mahogany table, his jaw clenched so tight I could see, the muscles twitching. Fiona didn't waste time with small talk. She opened a blue folder and slid a copy of the settlement agreement across the table. "Here are our terms for resolving the encroachment on the Kincaid Corridor," Fiona said, her voice steady and professional. "Mr. Hayes is willing to grant a permanent non-exclusive utility and access easement to Prescott Realty Group LLC. This will clear your title, resolve the zoning suspension, and allow Aegis Tactical Systems to occupy the plaza. But it is non-negotiable." Julian looked up, his eyes bloodshot. "Let's hear them." Connor's attorney reviewed the document, his brow furrowing as he read. "This is incredibly steep, Fiona. You're asking for a cash payout of $1.2 million. That figure represents the 2% equity stake Mr. Hayes was entitled to under Clause 14C of his contract, plus interest, damages for bad faith termination, and the value of the easement itself," Fiona replied. "If you refuse, the litigation continues. The stop work order stays in place. Your construction loan will be accelerated by Capital One in 48 hours, and Aegis will walk away by Friday. Your company will be in Chapter 11 bankruptcy by next Monday." Julian closed his eyes. He knew she was right. "What else?" Julian asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Second," Fiona continued, "we require the immediate termination of Connor Prescott from all officer and employee positions at Prescott Realty Group LLC and all its affiliates. The company's board of directors must pass a formal resolution stating that Connor Prescott is terminated for cause due to professional misconduct, specifically the fabrication and alteration of survey reports. He will receive zero severance," Connor snapped. He stood up, slamming his fists onto the table. "This is blackmail," Connor yelled, his face turning purple. "You can't do this. You're a surveyor, Garrett. You're a nobody who works in the mud. You think you can kick me out of my own family's company?" "Sit down, Connor," Julian said, his voice quiet but sharp. "Dad, we can fight this. We can find another way." "I said sit down," Julian roared, slamming his hand on the table. The room went silent. Connor slowly sat back down, his chest heaving, his eyes glaring at me. Julian looked at me, his eyes filled with defeat. "Is there anything else, Garrett?" "Yes," I said, speaking for the first time. "Tyler's employment must be terminated immediately. Fiona has already drafted a formal complaint to the Virginia Board for Architects, Professional Engineers, Land Surveyors, Certified Interior Designers, and Landscape Architects. We will file it this afternoon, detailing his professional malpractice in certifying the Stonebridge plat without verifying the deed records. He will lose his license." Julian nodded slowly. "We will comply. The board resolution is already drafted. Tyler is gone. Connor is relieved of his duties effective immediately." "Dad!" Connor protested, but Julian ignored him, and finally Fiona said, "Prescott Realty Group LLC will cover all of my firm's legal fees, totaling $45,000, payable today." Julian looked at his attorney, who gave a slow, barely perceptible nod. There was no defense. The trap they had built for me had snapped shut on their own fingers. "We will sign," Julian said. Within 2 hours, the paperwork was executed. The board of directors signed the resolution removing Connor from the company. The wire transfer of $1.2 million was initiated and confirmed by my bank. Prescott Realty Group also signed the check for Fiona's legal fees. In return, I signed the permanent easement document. I walked out of the office into the bright Virginia sunshine, a certified millionaire. The next morning, the VDOT trucks and the county code enforcement officers removed their barricades. The road was clear. Within hours, the convoy of Aegis Tactical Systems trucks began rolling into the parking lot. The utility lines were officially approved, the county issued the permanent certificate of occupancy, and Capital One lifted the default status of the construction loan. Prescott Realty Group survived, but it was permanently altered. Julian had to sell off a significant portion of his other properties to cover the cash payout and the delays. Connor was completely cut off from the family business, forced to take a low-level sales job at a different brokerage in another state. His reputation in the Loudoun County development circle utterly ruined. Tyler's license was suspended by the state board for 2 years, ensuring he would never stamp another survey without doing his homework first. As for me, I didn't go back to working for developers. I bought a small, Historic brick office building in downtown Leesburg. I hung a new sign outside. Kincaid and Hayes Land Consulting. Now when major developers in Loudoun County want to assemble parcels for multi-million-dollar projects, they don't rely on digital approximations anymore. They call me, they pay my premium rates, and they wait patiently for my stamp, because they know that in this county, if you don't know where the lines are drawn, Garrett Hayes will show you.